All right, welcome back to Weekend Hustlers, everybody. It's Pavlov here, and Nikita's with me too.
Hey, everybody.
Today, we're really digging into something huge happening right now. The clash between copyright law and how generative AI systems are trained.
Yeah, it's everywhere, isn't it?
It really is. You see these massive lawsuits, new laws being proposed all over the world. It feels like a real tipping point.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating, complex situation. You've got creators, understandably, very concerned about their work being used to train these incredibly powerful new tools.
And on the
other side, you have this breakneck pace of AI development, which, let's face it, depends on getting access to enormous data sets. And, well, a lot of that data includes copyrighted material.
So the U.S. Copyright Office just put out this big report trying to untangle all this.
That's right. And that's what we're zeroing in on today. We want to pull out the key insights, the policy thinking they're laying out. It's definitely a moving target, this whole area.
Yeah, things are changing fast. So consider this our mission. Cutting through some of the noise, unpacking what the report says, and figuring out why it matters to, well, pretty much anyone creating or using content today. We'll look at how the data gets collected, how the models are trained, how they're deployed. Always keeping an eye on those copyright friction points and, crucially, the whole fair use debate.
Sounds good. Where do we start? Data collection seems logical.
Let's do it. How are these massive data sets actually put together?
Okay, so the foundation for these big AI models is just a staggering amount of data. And it's really important to grasp that a lot of this isn't just, abstract data points.
Right.
It's copyrighted stuff, text from books, articles, websites, images, video, audio recordings. The Copyright Office report really stresses this. These aren't just data. They embody creative expression that's protected by law.
It's not like teaching an AI to spot stop signs using public domain pictures. This is different.
Exactly. We're talking novels, artwork, music, the stuff that makes up our cultural fabric.
So how does anyone even gather all that? It seems like a monumental task.
It is. The report points to a few main methods. Web scraping is a big one. Automated bots crawl the internet, grabbing content.
Just hoovering it up.
Pretty much. And sometimes, the report notes, they even find ways around paywalls.
Ah, that sounds like an immediate red flag, right? Accessing stuff people are trying to sell.
It definitely raises questions about authorized access, yeah. Then there's downloading whole databases, think backups of Wikipedia or large academic data sets.
Okay.
And interestingly, some data comes from users interacting with AI systems unless they specifically opt out.
That user data angle, that feels like a whole other can of worms regarding transparency.
It is. So once they have this mountain of raw data, it's not ready to use, is it?
No, definitely not. There must be a huge cleanup job.
Absolutely. The report calls it curation. It involves filtering, getting rid of unwanted stuff like explicit content, watermarks, duplicates, low-quality files.
Makes sense.
Then cleaning, stripping out website menus, ads, social media buttons. Sometimes even copyright notices get removed during this stage.
Removing copyright notices. That seems problematic.
It can be, yeah. Finally, they compile it all, sometimes weighting certain sources more heavily, like upsampling Wikipedia because it's generally high-quality text.
So you need quantity, but also quality. It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
You mentioned publicly available versus authorized data earlier. Why is that distinction so critical here?
Because publicly available just means it's on the internet. It doesn't mean you have permission to copy it and use it for AI training. The copyright usually still belongs to someone.
Got it.
The report also mentions that sometimes data collection is more targeted now, like gathering specific types of videos, not just broad scraping. Understanding this whole data gathering and cleaning process is really key before we even get to the training part.
Wait, the data's collected, it's cleaned up. Now for the training, the part that feels a bit like magic. Can you break down how these models actually learn from all this stuff for those of us who aren't AI researchers?
Sure. At its core, it involves things called neural networks and deep learning. You can sort of picture a huge, complex web of interconnected nodes, like a digital brain.
Okay.
When you feed it the training data, the model makes predictions. It guesses what comes next or identifies something. Then it checks its guess against the actual data. If it's wrong, it adjusts these internal settings called weights.
Like tiny knobs and dials.
Exactly like that. Billions of tiny knobs. And it just keeps doing this over and over. Predict, check, adjust, predict, check, adjust. Through millions or billions of examples, it slowly learns the patterns and relationships hidden in the data.
That knobs analogy helps. Now, the report focuses a lot on generative language models. How does that predict, check, adjust process work when the goal is, say, predicting the next word?
For language models, it's often called generative pre-training. They're shown massive amounts of text, and they learn to predict the next token. A token could be a whole word, part of a word, or even just punctuation.
Like autocomplete on steroids.
Kind of, yeah, but much more sophisticated. The report uses the twinkle twinkle little star example. The model sees text like this countless times. It learns that after twinkle twinkle, the word little is statistically very likely to come next, followed by star. It's building this incredibly complex map of statistical probabilities for how words fit together.
A giant statistical map of language. Wow. And the report talks about scaling, more parameters, more data, more compute power. Why is bigger better here?
Scaling turned out to be a huge breakthrough. Researchers found that if you dramatically increase the model size, more of those internal knobs or parameters feed it way more data and use much more powerful computers, you get models that are surprisingly good at lots of different tasks, even ones they weren't specifically trained for.
General purpose AI.
Exactly. But this scaling also means they need insane amounts of data. Some experts are actually worried we might run out of easily accessible text data on the internet to feed them.
Run out of internet. That's quite a thought. And this hunger for data is right back at the heart of the copyright issue. The report also distinguishes pre-training from fine-tuning. What's the difference?
Pre-training is that initial massive learning phase on the broad data set that gives the model its general knowledge. Fine-tuning is taking that pre-trained model and training it further on a smaller, more specific data set.
To do a particular job.
Right, like making it good at writing computer code or marketing emails or making its responses safer and more helpful. That's called alignment training. Oh, and the report also mentions memorization.
Memorization, meaning the AI actually stores and repeats parts of the training data.
Potentially, yeah. It's a concern that models might inadvertently memorize specific chunks of data they were trained on.
And if it spits out something memorized that's copyrighted, well, that sounds like a clear infringement problem.
It certainly raises that possibility.
Okay, so we've got the data collection, the training. Now deployment. How does the average person actually interact with these models?
Generally, you're not talking directly to the core statistical model. You're interacting with a larger AI system.
Like a chatbot interface or an image generator tool.
Exactly. That system takes your input, sends it to the model, gets the raw output, and then processes it into something useful for you. And how that deployment system is designed matters a lot for copyright.
How so?
Well, the report mentions a technique called retrieval augmented generation, or R.
Barger. What's that?
Think of it as giving the AI model access to real-time information, almost like it can do a quick web search before answering you.
Okay.
So if you ask it, say, who won the Best Drama Emmy in 2024, the RG system might formulate a search query, pull information from recent news articles, and then use that info to generate the answer.
I see. And the report flags this as a concern, especially for news outlets.
Yes, because the AI could be summarizing or even directly quoting their recent copyrighted reporting without necessarily sending the user back to the original source.
Yeah.
That could hit their traffic and revenue.
Yeah, you could see why they'd be worried. What about those safety measures like alignment training? Do they help at the deployment stage?
They try. Systems often have hidden safety prompts to steer the AI away from generating problematic output, including potentially infringing content. And the alignment training helps too.
But they're not perfect.
Definitely not perfect. The report notes that determined users can often find ways around these guardrails. And of course, there are the terms of service you agree to when you use these tools, which usually touch on licensing and acceptable use.
Right. So even when the tool is out in the wild, there are attempts to manage copyright risk, but it's not foolproof. This whole pipeline, from data scraping to the final output, seems loaded with potential copyright clashes.
It really does.
So let's get right to it. Where does the Copyright Office see potential infringement happening? What specific rights might be violated?
Okay, so copyright law gives creators a bundle of exclusive rights. The right to reproduce their work, distribute it, perform or display it publicly, and create derivative works based on it. The report basically says, yeah, AI development potentially bumps up against these rights at almost every step.
Okay, let's walk through it. Data collection and curation.
Reproduction, primarily. Just the act of scraping websites and downloading copyrighted material to build those huge data sets involves making copies. Storing those copies is exercising the reproduction right.
Even if they delete the data later, after training.
The report argues that the initial copying itself could be infringement. And often, these datasets aren't deleted, they're kept and reused, which means ongoing reproduction.
Okay, so making the copy is step one. What about the actual training process?
Reproduction again, in a couple of ways. First, you have to copy those massive data sets onto the powerful computers used for training. That's more reproduction. Second, during the training itself, the model temporarily loads chunks of copyrighted works into its memory to process them and adjust those internal weights.
So even temporary copies inside the machine count.
That's the argument. It's a form of reproduction needed for the learning process, even if the full work isn't permanently stored within the final trained model in an accessible way.
That's subtle but important. And finally, deployment, especially with that RA technique.
More reproduction. When a RAG system fetches external content, say, a snippet from a news article, and integrates it into the answer it gives the user, that act of copying and incorporating the retrieved content is again, potentially exercising the reproduction right without permission.
Particularly worrying for news publishers and similar folks.
Definitely. They see their fresh content potentially being reused immediately without authorization or payment.
So the Copyright Office lays out a strong case for potential infringement throughout the AI lifecycle. But then comes the big defense, the one we hear constantly: fair use. Is training AI fair use?
That is the central question, isn't it? Fair use under Section 107 of the Copyright Act allows limited use of copyrighted works without permission for things like criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, research.
That's fuzzy, right? Not a clear rule.
Exactly. It's notoriously flexible, decided case by case based on 4 factors. And the report spends a lot of time analyzing how those factors might apply here.
Okay, let's tackle the 4 factors. First up, the purpose and character of the use. Is it transformative? This seems to be the main battlefield.
It really is. Transformativeness is key. The argument for fair use here is that training AI is a fundamentally different purpose than why the original work was created.
How so?
Proponents say the AI isn't consuming the work like a human would. It's performing statistical analysis, identifying patterns, extracting uncopyrightable elements like facts or ideas, all to build a tool that does something new, generate novel outputs. They often compare it to search engines creating indexes, or the Hathitrust case where digitizing books for search was found transformative.
The AI learning the idea of a cat from millions of pictures, not enjoying each picture. Makes intuitive sense. What's the counter argument? Why wouldn't it be transformative?
Opponents hit several points. Many AI projects are highly commercial, which can weigh against fair use. They argue AI outputs can substitute for the original works, harming the market think AI art, replacing stock photos. They also point to the sheer scale of the copying involved, and they cite the recent Supreme Court case, Warhol v. Goldsmith, which emphasized that transformativeness needs more than just a different purpose. It often needs a different character or expression, too. Simply repurposing isn't always enough.
And do things like safety guardrails trying to stop the AI from just copying matter here?
They might. If the AI system is effectively designed to prevent infringing outputs, that could support the argument that the purpose of the use was genuinely transformative and non-competing. It's all interconnected.
Okay, so factor 1 is complex, heavily debated. What about factor 2? The nature of the copyrighted work.
This factor generally gives more protection to highly creative works, fiction, music, art, compared to more factual works like news articles or databases. Unpublished works also get stronger protection.
And AI trains on everything, right? Creative, factual, published, maybe even unpublished is scraped.
Exactly. So the weight of this factor depends on what specific works are being considered in a given lawsuit. But often, the report suggests, this factor might be less decisive than the others when you're talking about training on such massive, mixed data sets.
Gotcha. On to factor 3. The amount and substantiality of the portion used. This feels critical for AI, since training often involves copying entire works.
It does seem critical. Normally, copying the whole work cuts against fair use, but there are exceptions. Courts have allowed copying entire works for certain transformative purposes, like in intermediate copying cases. Think reverse engineering software, like in Sega v. Accolade. You might need to copy the whole thing to understand its unprotectable ideas.
So the argument for AI training is similar. You need the whole work to learn the statistical patterns.
That's the argument. Proponents say that even though the whole work is ingested, the AI is primarily using the underlying patterns, not the specific expressive details in a substantial way in its output. The counter, obviously, is, but you still copied the entire thing initially.
It comes back to that initial copy.
It does. And again, the effectiveness of those guardrails preventing the model from spitting out verbatim copies becomes really important here. If it can reproduce substantial parts, that weakens the fair use claim for this factor.
Makes sense. Which brings us to the fourth and often the most important factor. The effect of the use on the potential market for, or value of, the copyrighted work. The money factor.
Precisely. This looks at market harm. Does the AI use substitute for the original work? Does it usurp a potential licensing market?
What are the arguments that AI does harm the market?
Direct substitution is the big one. AI generating text or images that people might otherwise have paid the original creator for. Verbatim outputs that are substantially similar. Even just diluting the market by flooding it with similar AI-generated content. And importantly, interfering with potential licensing markets if creators could be licensing their work for training. Widespread unpaid use undermines that.
Okay, and the flip side. How do AI developers argue they don't harm the market?
They often say generative AI creates fundamentally new kinds of works, fulfilling different market demands, not directly replacing the originals. They also question if a comprehensive licensing market for the sheer scale of data needed is even feasible.
The transaction cost would be huge, right? Finding every copyright holder.
Potentially enormous, especially for smaller AI startups or individual creators wanting to license their work. The report also brings in the idea of public benefit, AI's potential for innovation, creativity, science weighing against purely market-based harm, but creators push back hard, saying this innovation shouldn't come at the expense of their livelihoods.
Is there actually a functioning market for licensing works for AI training right now?
The report says there's some activity. Deals are happening in publishing, music, stock photos, but it's debatable whether this proves a broad, efficient market exists or could exist for all the types and amounts of data being used. The scale and diversity needed are major hurdles.
So some licensing, but maybe not a complete solution yet. The report also mentions other considerations, like commerciality and lawful access.
Right. Commercial use generally weighs against fair use, but defining commercial in AI development is tricky. Research might be non-commercial initially, but lead to a commercial product people talk about data laundering.
Interesting term.
And funding sources can matter. But crucially, the report stresses that using illegally obtained data like pirated works would weigh heavily against fair use. You have to have lawful access to the works in the first place.
That seems fundamental. Okay, that's a deep dive into fair use in the US. It's clearly going to be hashed out in courts for a while. How are other countries tackling this? Is there a global consensus emerging?
Not really a consensus, no. It's more of a patchwork. Many places are looking at specific exceptions for text and data mining, or TDM.
TDM exceptions.
Yeah. The European Union, for example, has one for scientific research that rights holders can't opt out of. Then there's an optional one for other uses, like commercial training, where rights holders can potentially opt out. The EU's new AI Act also brings in transparency rules about training data.
An opt-out system for commercial use. Interesting. What about elsewhere?
Singapore has a TDM exception, but you need lawful access, and it's mainly for computational analysis. Japan has a fairly broad exception for AI development, as long as it doesn't unreasonably harm the copyright owner's interests, basically, not just for personal enjoyment.
Okay.
The UK currently has a narrow one for non-commercial research, but they've been debating a broader one, maybe with an opt-out too. Israel uses a fair use approach, similar to the US. Korea and China are also developing rules. It's really varied.
It sounds like everyone's grappling with it, but taking slightly different paths. Any talk of trying to harmonize these rules internationally?
There's definitely talk. People argue consistent rules would be better for everyone. AI companies operating globally, creators trying to protect rights everywhere. But getting dozens of countries with different legal systems and economic priorities to agree on something this complex, well, it's a huge challenge.
No kidding. So given all this uncertainty and the different global approaches, what about licensing? If fair use isn't a guaranteed shield, what might licensing frameworks look like?
The report explores a few possibilities. One is just voluntary direct licensing. An AI company negotiates directly with, say, a publishing house or a photo agency.
But you said the scale makes that tough.
Exactly. Negotiating thousands or millions of individual licenses seems impractical for large-scale training. So another option is voluntary collective licensing.
Like music rights societies, SAP, BMI.
Precisely. Collective management organizations, or CMOs, could negotiate licenses for large pools of works on behalf of many creators. This could massively reduce transaction costs.
Could that work for text and images too?
Potentially. Existing CMOs could expand or new ones could form, but there are challenges. Making sure they truly represent everyone, avoiding antitrust issues if they become too powerful.
What else?
Well, there's statutory licensing, where the government steps in and sets the rules and royalty rates. But that's often controversial. Creators worry it undermines their exclusive rights, and setting fair rates is incredibly difficult. And then there's something called extended collective licensing, or ECL. It's kind of a hybrid. A collective license covers all works in a category, even from creators who aren't members of the CMO, but individual creators have the right to opt out.
An opt-out collective license. Spain tried that briefly, didn't they?
They did, though it's since been withdrawn for AI, I believe. It's another model being discussed.
Lots of options, each with pros and cons. What's the Copyright Office's leaning based on the report? Did they favor any particular approach?
They seem to prefer letting voluntary licensing solutions develop where they can. They see collective licensing as a potentially useful, flexible tool to help make that happen. They're more cautious about statutory or compulsory licenses set by the government.
So try to let the market work it out first, maybe with help from collective licensing.
That seems to be the inclination. They recognize that legal clarity, knowing whether training is fair use or not, is needed to help those market solutions actually emerge. It's all intertwined.
It really is. Wow. This has been incredibly helpful in mapping out such a complex and, frankly, fast-moving area. It's just so clear that finding that balance, protecting creators while still enabling AI innovation is maybe one of the biggest challenges we face right now.
Absolutely. And the Copyright Office report, while not giving all the answers, really does lay out the crucial questions and the stakes involved. How we navigate this will shape a lot about creativity and technology in the years to come.
A huge balancing act with major consequences. Well, that's all the time we have for this. Thanks so much for joining us as we navigated the intricate world of copyright and AI training. And just a note, for those who prefer to listen in Hindi, a version of it is also available.
नमस्कार वीकेंड हसलर्स में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम एक बहुत ही अहम और सच कहूँ तो पेचीदा मुद्दे पे बात कर रहे हैं। ये जो जेनरेटिव एआई सिस्टम है, इनको सिखाने के लिए कॉपीराइट वाली सामग्री का इस्तेमाल और इसके कानूनी सवाल क्या है। हमारी ये बातचीत अमेरिकी कॉपीराइट ऑफिस की एक ताज़ा, काफ़ी डिटेल्ड रिपोर्ट पर आधारित है।
हाँ बिल्कुल, और इस रिपोर्ट के सारे हमारा इरादा है कि एआई ट्रेनिंग में ये जो कॉपीराइट उल्लंघन के आरोप हैं और फिर बचाव में फेयर यूज़ यानी उचित उपयोग का जो तर्क आता है, उसको थोड़ा गहराई से समझें। देखते हैं रिपोर्ट के मुख्य पॉइंट्स क्या कहते हैं।
तो पहले ये समझते हैं कि ये एआई मॉडल्स, खासकर जो बड़े भाषा मॉडल हैं, सीखते कैसे हैं। मतलब इन्हें भारी मात्रा में डेटा दिया जाता है।
हाँ, बहुत सारा डेटा, और इसमें अक्सर कॉपीराइट वाली चीज़ें होती हैं, किताबें, लेख, कोड, तस्वीरें, बहुत कुछ। ये मॉडल क्या करते हैं, वो टेक्स्ट या डेटा को टोकन, मतलब एक तरह की संख्यात्मक इकाई में बदलते हैं और फिर पैटर्न पहचानने के लिए अपने अंदरूनी वेट्स को एडजस्ट करते रहते हैं, सीखते हैं।
अच्छा, और ये इतना सारा डेटा आता कहाँ से है? ये सब मिलता कैसे है?
कई तरह के हैं। एक तो है वेब स्क्रैपिंग, मतलब इंटरनेट से डेटा उठाना, जैसे कॉमन क्रॉल जैसे बड़े डेटा सेट हैं। फिर विकिपीडिया जैसे पब्लिक डेटाबेस हैं, यूजर्स का दिया डेटा भी होता है। और आजकल एक नया ट्रेंड है सीधे कंटेंट मालिकों के साथ लाइसेंसिंग डील।
लाइसेंसिंग डील्स, ठीक है। तो डेटा इकट्ठा हो गया, फिर
इसको ट्रेनिंग के लिए तैयार भी तो करना पड़ता होगा। बिल्कुल, इसमें फिर होती है फिल्टरिंग, मतलब जो बेकार या गैर जरूरी चीजें उन्हें हटाना। फिर सफाई होती है, जैसे वेबसाइट से नेविगेशन लिंक हटा दिए, विज्ञापन हटा दिए, और फिर इसे ठीक से संकलित किया जाता है, जैसे द पाइल जैसा कोई बड़ा डेटा सेट बनाने के लिए।
अच्छा,
पर यहाँ एक कानूनी पेच ये भी है कि सफाई के दौरान कभी कभी कॉपीराइट मैनेजमेंट जानकारी, जैसे लेखक का नाम या नोटिस, वो शायद अनजाने में हट सकती है।
ओ, और वो अपने आप में एक उल्लंघन हो सकता है।
हाँ, वो एक अलग समस्या खड़ी कर सकता है।
तो अब आते एकदम सीधे मुद्दे पर। रिपोर्ट क्या कहती है? क्या ये कॉपीराइट उल्लंघन है?
देखिए, रिपोर्ट साफ कहती है कि डेटा जमा करने और ट्रेनिंग की प्रक्रिया में कॉपीराइट वाले कामों का पुनरुत्पादन यानी रिप्रोडक्शन तो होता है, इसमें कोई शक नहीं है। मॉडल को सिखाने के लिए काम या उसके हिस्सों की कॉपी सिस्टम में अस्थायी रूप से बनती ही बनती हैं।
और यही कॉपीराइट मालिक के खास अधिकार का उल्लंघन माना जा सकता है, कम से कम पहली नजर में तो।
बिल्कुल, इसे कहते हैं प्राइमा फेसी इन्फ्रिंजमेंट। और इसके अलावा एक और चीज है, रेएग, रिट्रीवल ऑगमेंटेड जनरेशन। इसमें एआई सिस्टम जवाब देने के लिए बाहर से जानकारी खींचता है, जैसे सर्च इंजन से। इसमें भी कॉपीराइट सामग्री की कॉपी बन सकती है।
ठीक है, ठीक है। तो अगर तकनीकी तौर पर ये उल्लंघन है, तो फिर एआई डेवलपर्स का बचाव क्या है? वो क्या तर्क देते हैं?
उनका सबसे बड़ा, सबसे अहम बचाव है फेयर यूज का सिद्धांत, उचित उपयोग। ये अमेरिकी कॉपीराइट कानून का एक हिस्सा है जो कहता है कि कुछ खास परिस्थितियों में बिना इजाजत भी कॉपीराइट सामग्री इस्तेमाल हो सकती है।
फेयर यूज, इसके कुछ फैक्टर्स होते हैं ना, 4 फैक्टर्स शायद।
हाँ, 4 फैक्टर्स हैं, लेकिन रिपोर्ट के हिसाब से जो सबसे ज्यादा बहस है वो पहले फैक्टर पर है, इस्तेमाल का उद्देश्य और उसका चरित्र।
उद्देश्य और चरित्र, इसका मतलब
क्या एआई ट्रेनिंग ट्रांसफॉर्मेटिव है? क्या ये मूल काम को बस कॉपी कर रहा है या उसे किसी नए मकसद के लिए बदल रहा है, जैसे सिर्फ पढ़ने के लिए नहीं बल्कि पैटर्न सीखने के लिए इस्तेमाल करना?
हाँ, ये ट्रांसफॉर्मेटिव वाली बात तो काफी सुनी है, और इसमें वो वॉहल वाला केस भी तो जुड़ गया है हाल में।
बिल्कुल, वॉहल केस ने इस बहस को और भी पेचीदा बना दिया है। और इसी से जुड़ा सवाल है कि क्या ये गैर अभिव्यंजक यानी नॉन एक्सप्रेसिव इस्तेमाल है, यानी क्या काम की क्रिएटिविटी की बजाय उसके अंदर छिपे फैक्ट्स या पैटर्न का इस्तेमाल हो रहा है?
और रिपोर्ट ये भी कहती है कि अलग अलग इस्तेमाल का विश्लेषण अलग होगा, जैसे प्री ट्रेनिंग और फाइन ट्यूनिंग।
सही कहा, प्री ट्रेनिंग का फेयर यूज एनालिसिस शायद फाइन ट्यूनिंग से अलग हो।
अच्छा, अब आते हैं तीसरे फैक्टर पर, कितनी मात्रा इस्तेमाल हुई?
हाँ, ये भी एक बड़ा मुद्दा है। ट्रेनिंग में तो अक्सर पूरा का पूरा काम इस्तेमाल होता है।
तो सवाल है कि क्या ये वाकई जरूरी है? क्या इतना सब कुछ कॉपी करना फेयर यूज के दायरे में आ सकता है?
यहाँ इंटरमीडिएट कॉपीइंग यानी बीच की कॉपी बनाने का कर दिया जाता है कि ये कॉपी सिर्फ तकनीकी प्रक्रिया का हिस्सा है, अंतिम प्रोडक्ट का नहीं।
और वो जो एआई के आउटपुट पर रोक लगाते हैं, गार्ड रेल्स, उनका भी कोई रोल है?
ये गार्ड रेल्स की एआई सीधे सीधे कॉपी न करे, ये भी फैक्टर 3 और 4 के विश्लेषण में शायद मायने रखें।
और चौथा फैक्टर, वो सबसे विवादित लगता है।
हाँ, बाजार पर असर। क्या एआई ट्रेनिंग मूल काम के बाजार को नुकसान पहुंचा रही है? क्या एआई के आउटपुट की वजह से लोग ओरिजिनल काम खरीदना बंद कर देंगे?
मतलब रिप्लेसमेंट का सवाल।
बिल्कुल। और फिर लाइसेंसिंग बाजार का क्या होगा? एआई कंपनियां कहती हैं कि भाई इतने बड़े पैमाने पर हर चीज का लाइसेंस लेना प्रैक्टिकल नहीं है,
जबकि कंटेंट वाले कहते हैं कि लाइसेंस ही सही तरीका है, हमारी मर्जी के बिना इस्तेमाल क्यों?
सही, ये एक बड़ा गतिरोध है।
और ये लाइसेंसिंग की माथापच्ची सिर्फ अमेरिका में ही चल रही है या दुनिया भर में?
नहीं, ये एक ग्लोबल मुद्दा है। यूरोपियन यूनियन, जापान, यूके, सब जगह इस पर काम हो रहा है। उनके पास टेक्स्ट और डेटा माइनिंग (TDM) के लिए खास कानूनी छूट हैं या फेयर यूज, फेयर डीलिंग के अपने नियम हैं। कई जगह ऑप्ट आउट का सिस्टम भी है, जहां क्रिएटर कह सकता है कि मेरा काम एआई ट्रेनिंग में इस्तेमाल मत करो।
ऑप्ट आउट। और हम देख भी रहे हैं कि लाइसेंसिंग डील हो भी रही हैं आजकल, बड़ी एआई कंपनियों और न्यूज़ पब्लिशर्स के बीच या फोटो एजेंसीज के बीच।
हाँ, सौदे होने शुरू हो गए। लेकिन चुनौतियां वही हैं। स्केल कैसे होगा, कीमत क्या होगी, क्या इससे बस कुछ बड़ी कंपनियों को ही फायदा होगा, कंपटीशन का क्या?
सही बात है।
रिपोर्ट में अलग अलग लाइसेंसिंग मॉडल्स की भी बात है, जैसे वॉलंटरी यानी अपनी मर्जी से, कंपल्सरी यानी अनिवार्य, और एक है ECL, एक्सटेंडेड कलेक्टिव लाइसेंसिंग।
ECL, ये क्या है?
इसमें जो कलेक्टिव मैनेजमेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस होती हैं, जो क्रिएटर्स के राइट्स मैनेज करती हैं, वो बड़े पैमाने पर लाइसेंस दे सकती हैं उन क्रिएटर्स की तरफ से भी जिन्होंने सीधे तौर पर हाँ नहीं कहा। इसे एक संभावित हल माना जा रहा है।
अच्छा, लेकिन इस पे भी सबकी राय एक नहीं होगी शायद।
बिल्कुल नहीं, इस पर भी काफी बहस है।
तो कुल मिला के ऐसा लग रहा है कि एक तरफ एआई का इनोवेशन है जो बहुत जरूरी है, और दूसरी तरफ उन क्रिएटर्स के अधिकार हैं जिनके काम पर ही ये इनोवेशन टिका है। इसी के बीच संतुलन साधना है।
बिल्कुल सही, यही सबसे बड़ी चुनौती है। रिपोर्ट इन सब जटिलताओं और तर्कों को सामने रखती है, पर कोई सीधा आसान जवाब नहीं देती। ये तो साफ है कि कानून अभी टेक्नोलॉजी के पीछे पीछे चल रहा है, तालमेल बिठाने की कोशिश कर रहा है।
और शायद सोचने वाली बात यह है कि कोर्ट में जो केस चल रहे हैं और एआई तकनीक जिस तेजी से बढ़ रही है, ये आने वाले वक्त में ये जो रिश्ता है क्रिएशन और कंप्यूटेशन का, उसे कैसे बदलेगा?
हाँ, ये देखना वाकई दिलचस्प होगा। भविष्य में ये संतुलन कैसे बनता है, ये बहुत अहम होगा।